first question is for Mr. Haynes. You testified in Austin to change a bill that opened the door for the Ranger College annexation election, and then later came out publicly against the annexation close to the election. Can you explain your involvement and the subsequent change in stance? You have 3 minutes.
Well, I like to see we're starting out slow. Look, 5 years ago, I supported a Republican-backed bill that gave people the right to vote if there was a grassroots movement where people signed a petition saying this needed to be on the ballot. I want you to know, at the time that I testified to that, the rate that was being told to me by Ranger was a nickel, not 11, not 42, or any other rate. If you listen to the full testimony that I gave, I also said Ranger was telling me that we would have control of the board. And by virtue of having control of the board, we could move the headquarters here, which meant lots of jobs. It meant big infrastructure and buildings, and it meant lots of students. Okay? I thought those things were important enough that if there was a grassroots movement, people ought to have the right to vote. It was really that simple. Now, fast forward 4 years later. None of those things had come to fruition. There was no discussion about us having control of the board. There was no plans for a campus. There were no promises of jobs, and there were no promises of students. And therefore, I did not support that position. I wrote a letter, published it on the Carter site, issued it on October the 21st of 2017. I came out against it on both radio and television, gave interviews of why I was opposed. You might remember that they actually ran a story in the news about the mayor and the former mayor opposing one another. I donated money to the Carter Group, and I put a sign in my yard saying I was opposed to it. Now, I want to talk about timing, because in a recent television interview, Mike and others, not just mine, have criticized me and said that my timing was not good, it was too late in the process. However, my opponent has came out and supported Mike Lane very strong. And he said that Representative Lane did a great job with the Ranger College annexation. Mike Lane issued a statement on October the 29th of 2017. And I'm going to quote him. He said, "I'm very cautious of a new tax. I want to encourage everyone in Brown County to look carefully at this annexation proposal." October the 19th. I wrote a letter 2 days later where I directly opposed, gave reasons why I was opposed. And yet my opponent has said, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just stating factually, my opponent has said Mike Lane was a champion against Ranger, and I was not. Furthermore, I want to ask you, if this bill was such an opposition to conservative thinking, why was it not repealed in the 2 Republican-controlled legislatures that happened after that bill was supported and before the vote came forward in 2017? Okay? I think that pretty much does. Thank you.
Mr. Tittle, do you want to respond? You have 2 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. It's an important issue. 12 years ago, I campaigned very hard against Industrial Park annexation, driven by our city council and our previous mayor, who was also driving the Ranger annexation, doing the commercials and the advertising for it. I spent my whole career working for factories like 3M, 7 factories all over the United States. The #1 reason that American jobs in factories leave is because of high taxes and low wages. In the 80s, jobs were going to Mexico when I was working. In the 90s, jobs were going to Asia. This past decade, we've seen jobs go to Singapore. We lost $100 million in equipment and dozens and dozens of jobs that we could have had right here in Brownwood, Texas, at this factory that I fought hard for. So here's my issue with Ranger annexation. Annexation is always wrong. Any type of countywide annexation for our factories that will hurt our factories and hurt our businesses and hurt our citizens. So I will always be against Ranger annexation. Now, I don't guess I want to tell the rest of the story because Stephen and I are friends, but I spent an hour in his office weeks before that asking for Stephen to step out and talk out about this issue. Why? Because dozens and dozens and dozens of my friends and neighbors were concerned about this. Remember, the annexation issue came up right on top, right on the back of a record high property tax increase and a record high property rate increase. So it was a big issue in my community. So I asked Stephen to speak out, and we spent an hour, and I went there for Stephen, not for me. I didn't want to get into politics. And I asked him to speak out, and he said, "Mike, I just can't." He has his reasons.
30
30 seconds? Okay. And our conversation ended, and I have never said this publicly, and I almost hate to say it here, but as we were shaking hands at the door, Stephen said, well, Mike, I'm not afraid of those you wackos on Facebook. Well, those wackos ended up being 6,000 people that turned out to vote. I think a leader should lead, not come in at the end, lead out at the beginning. Thank you. And I will never support Ranger annexation. I will never spend your tax dollars to go down to Austin to testify for any type of annexation on our county.
Okay, Mr. Tittle, this is for you. We know that Zach Maxwell has created at least one of your campaign Facebook groups, but has been a very vocal supporter of your campaign and has been critical of your opponent, other councilmen and city staff. Zach Maxwell is a paid employee of Empower Texans, a nonprofit political action group. What is Empower Texans' involvement in your campaign? You have 3 minutes.
If you'll look at the campaign finance reports, Zachary Maxwell nor Empower Texas have given one single penny to my campaign. As a matter of fact, you'll see the single largest donor to my campaign is me, over $4,000, because I'm standing for working men and working women and standing for the people. I did meet Zach at a Republican women's meeting a few months ago after I got into the election, so I know who he is. But I think the question you ought to be asking is look at Stephen's campaign finance report. Who are the single largest givers to Stephen's financial campaign report? The same folks that were supporting Ranger annexation. You think about that.
Okay, and as a quick follow-up here, given the statements that he has made on your behalf, if you are elected as mayor, then who are voters actually electing? Are they electing Mike Tittle or are they electing Empower Texans?
Well, I think my previous answer was very clear. I spent $4,000 of my own money to get myself elected. I don't stand for anybody but for working men, working women, and the taxpayer. That's exactly why I'm in this race.
And just one more follow-up question.
Okay, good.
I know that we can look at the campaign contribution records and
Right.
see those fiscal dollars, that strong dollar amount. However, Zach Maxwell's job description is pretty much what he's done for you, the social media management, is creating these groups and that sort of thing. Now, did he do that while he was being paid by Empower Texans, and wouldn't that be considered a contribution of sorts?
Well, it would be. Here's the deal. I'm looking around at the gray-haired folks in the room. I'm 58 years old, okay? So I wouldn't say I'm a social media expert. I've had lots of help with social media and charts and graphs. By the way, since I retired, I don't have all the tools that I have when I was working at 3M. I had PowerPoint and Word and all the documents and pictures. All I have is an Excel spreadsheet on my computer at home. Why? Because I'm a fiscal conservative, and I reduced costs when I retired. I reduced costs on my computer software, bottled water, every little thing you could cut. So I'm running for the people of Brownwood, for the good of Brownwood, because we've seen record high property taxes, record high property tax rates, record high city spending in the last 8 years, record high debt, and record high interest on the debt. And I believe we need somebody with business experience. We've had lawyers running our city for 26 and 34 years. I did get the math right. And I think it's time for somebody with business experience to help our budget in our city.
And just one more follow-up question.
Okay. Hey, I thought we were going to have one follow-up.
Well, it's the councilman gave us so much time.
Okay, good.
They spoke so quickly. You did speak of cutting back on, computer equipment, things at the house. It makes sense, being retired. Who created the video that some claimed was heavily edited? Some said that the message was clear.
Yeah. I think the message was clear. Here's how the video's been around for years, as somebody said, right?
But just for clarity, who created that version?
Here's what happened. I selected, it's a long video, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes long. Any of you that have ever watched legal testimony, it'll bore you to death. I personally picked the starting point and the ending point to get the facts. 1 minute, 28 seconds, because I don't watch 10-minute videos when they come across my Facebook feed. They're boring. And that's the way that occurred. I had a couple people help me edit it. One was Zach, but there were other young people that helped me edit it too that had the skills that I don't have as a 58-year-old on Facebook. Does that satisfy us on Empower Texas? I am not supported by Empower Texas. I'm supported by the working men and women of Brownwood, the taxpayers of Brownwood. That's who I'll work and serve. I'm not going to work for the rich and powerful in Brownwood who want to spend your money on things like ranger annexation. I will never support ranger annexation or any other type countywide annexation that takes money away from our taxpayers. What we should do is spend money on businesses that pay taxes and that create jobs like 3M, Kohler, Superior, etc. That's the proper way to use tax dollars, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Tittle, especially for your patience with that multifaceted question.
That means I don't have to answer the next
No.
3 or 4 rebuttals.
You get a little break. You get a little break because Mr. Haynes, you do have 2 minutes to respond if you wish.
Well, look, I think if you go out and Google and you study Empower Texans, they want to control every seat, every elected position at every level. And when you've got a paid employee who's the Facebook administrator, or was, he's now removed himself since he was called out publicly, the creator of a Facebook page, when he comes onto my Facebook page and blasts me repeatedly over and over and over again, there's no question that Empower Texans, whether it's at Mike's request or not, is trying to influence this election. And we need to decide as a community why we want outside influences, people from other parts of the state, controlling what we do in Brownwood, Texas. Ferris Wilkes has given a lot of money. Tim Dunn has given a lot of money to those organizations to have direct influence. Great. So their money, they can do what they want to with it. I want Brownwood people deciding an election in Brownwood, Texas.
Okay, Mr. Haynes, continuing with you, here's some numbers crunching here. The city currently has almost $30 million in debt for various projects, with much of it being issued in the last 8 years. How do you as mayor justify that amount of debt? And you have 2 minutes.
The current debt is actually a little over $27 million. I think it's $27,300,000, somewhere in that range. And you look at it like this. You look at it on a per capita basis. If you were to divide that out on a per capita basis, it would currently the debt would be $1,422 per person. The debt hysteria is caused by groups like Empower Texans, who are taking the Fox News reports about the debt in our national capital, which is $62,200 per person, and they're trying to extrapolate that hysteria down to the local level. Let me give you this example. Our debt service is 10% of the city's budget. Put that as to an individual basis. If a guy owns a $60,000 home, he would pay $6,000 a year in debt service, or $500 per month. That means this guy has his house payment, his car payment, and his credit card payment is $500 a month, earning $60,000. That's the kind of debt that the city of Brownwood has. Folks, our debt is not out of control. People have asked me for local comparison numbers, so here are some other numbers. In a 2017 debt survey, this is actually 2016 amount, so it's a little higher than the number I just gave you because we reduced our debt. But at that point in time, Sweetwater had debt of $1,645 per capita. Brownwood, $1,656, almost exactly the same. Abilene, $2,448 per capita. Cleveland, $2,724 per capita. And our friends across the river in Early, $5,852 per capita. Okay? Folks, $62,200. That's what you hear on Fox News. Locally, currently, about $1,400 per capita. That is not out of control in the city of Brownwood. We have been exceptionally conservative, more conservative than most people are with their individual budgets by a long shot.
Mr. Tittle, this next question is on the same topic and will probably actually give you a chance to rebut that. The question is, you have discussed during your campaign that the city debt is too high. What is your plan to reduce that debt? And you have 2 minutes.
On the debt issue, there's a couple ways to look at debt. First of all, when you look at it per capita, I don't believe in looking at debt per capita. I don't believe in looking at debt percent. Just this morning I heard the mayor say on the radio, we've only increased spending of 1.6% over the last 8 years. That's $5 million. I think you need to look at the dollar figure. You can't go out and buy a house or a car with a percent or a ratio or a capita. You need to look at real dollars. And that's my concern with the debt. The debt did in the last 3 years reach an all-time record high, interest rate, over $1 million a year for I think it's 3 consecutive years. Walter, if I got that right, I know we debated that some. But think of the budget, what we could do with $1 million a year of interest. So how do you control the debt? You look at reducing unnecessary expenses like travel, consultants, lobbyists, and you look at reducing the cost on spending too fast. What happened is we just spent too much, too fast, and that's the reason we have record high debt. Follow up to that one?
No, sir, you're off the hook.
Okay, because I have a follow-up. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Haynes. The City of Brownwood has spent a significant amount of money on park improvements, including the development of a soccer complex, walking trail, park rehab at Cecil Holman, and construction of splash pads. Do you feel this is money well spent, and why? You have 3 minutes.
Absolutely. Terrifically well spent. Let me tell you what. I drive home, and I drive down Austin Avenue, and I go by Mason Park, and there's kids riding their bikes in the skate park, and they're playing in the splash pad, and they're playing soccer in the field. Folks, that's what cities do, okay? We provide services for our people. And the very worst thing that we can have in the city of Brownwood is incredibly high taxes and nothing to show for it, okay? What we have is to build families. There was a question earlier about how do you build families? You build parks. You build things that families do together. You make them drive by that park and look at all those little kids playing soccer and riding their bikes and thinking, you know what? This is a great place to live. When I was in Grapevine and lived up there in Dallas for a long time, let me tell you where the part of this comes from, okay? I loved Grapevine in a way. I hated the traffic. I hated the rat race. But you know what I loved? I loved going down to the park that was pristine, well-mowed, kids and families playing together. That gave me an enormous sense of pride that I lived in a community that would reinvest in itself. You've heard me say this quote before. When Robert Taylor brought United to Brownwood, I drove him by the baseball complex. Robert Taylor said, drove him all around town, very carefully selecting where we were going to go. He said at the end of that meeting, that baseball complex and that pool complex was the most impressive thing he showed me all day. Because I want to see a community that's reinvesting in itself. I don't want to move my people to a place that will not improve itself. Folks, it's about families, but it's also about business. It's about people coming to our community and saying, man, this is a great place to live.
And Mr. Tittle, do you want to respond? You have 2 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. You've never heard me say, if you read my Facebook site, anything critical about the swimming pool or the splash pads or the baseball complex. What you've heard me say is that we spent too much too fast. Here's how it affects you. If we go out and buy a house for $100,000, then we're probably okay. We can afford to pay the debt back on that house. But if we buy a $100,000 house every 2 years, before long we owe $500,000 or $600,000, and I can't afford that. The mayor can afford that because he's working full-time. I'm retired, so I live on a small pension. I could afford it when I was working for a 3M. But what I do want to say one thing about justice, about the splash pads. My daughter, I saw all the rants on Facebook about the splash pads whenever it came up 6 months ago. My daughter sitting right here, who I didn't get to introduce, Emily Attaway, CPA at higher paying, Brownwood graduate, Brownwood salutatorian, Brownwood Lion mascot when she was a senior 12 years ago. She's getting older, which means I'm getting older. But what I will say about the splash pads is I drove around and looked at them after my daughter made the issue. She said, Dad, something is wrong here. In her neighborhood, the splash pads have 8 or 10 nice, beautiful fixtures on them. The rest of the neighborhoods on the other side of the town have a slab of concrete and a hose or a pipe sticking out of it. That is not the right way to manage your city dollars. I'm not for just the rich and powerful in Brownwood. Those same folks that want to Ranger annexation, I'm for all the people in Brownwood. I think we should spend our money fairly on the north side and the south side of Brownwood on opportunities for our children. And by the way, my kids love, is it 30 seconds? My kids love playing in splash pads over, my grandkids over at Indian Park. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Tittle, this is for you. On February 17th, you posted on social media, balance the budget, lower property taxes, no more Ranger annexation, and drain the swamp. That last phrase, drain the swamp, is what I want to ask you about. By drain the swamp, what do you mean? Do you believe that the current city council and city administration need to be replaced? You have 3 minutes.
No. Okay, that's the answer to the first part. Look, politics have a way of dividing all of us. Even my granddaughter came to me and she said, Papa, why are you running against Mr. Haynes? Because she's friends with Stephen's daughter, Ella. And I said, I'm not against Stephen Haynes. What I am against is record high debt, record high property taxes, record high spending, and I do believe we need someone with business experience that'll take a look at the budget and look for the opportunities to take cost out line item by line item. The budget is thousands of lines long of Excel spreadsheets. So, and draining the swamp, what I think we, hello? Hello? Okay, there we go. There we go. It just means we need to eliminate wasteful spending. It means somebody needs to stand up against those people who are pushing for industrial park annexation, which will drive our factories out of town. I know the inside story in 3M. When the city tried to annex them 12 years ago, the executives called me and says, "What is wrong with that town down there? Don't they want that factory in that town?" When I was plant manager, we had to spend dozens of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars overseas for one single reason: record high taxes.
And Mr. Haynes, if you wish to rebut, you have 2 minutes.
Well, the drain the swamp phrase is clearly a reference to throwing everybody out. I mean, there's no question that that's what that's intended to be. It's a phrase that came up in the Ranger College annexation that we saw over and over and over again with kind of an anti-group. And I'll tell this little story, I'll tell it quickly, but Councilman Miller and I went to a program one time, and the speaker got up and he said there was this church and there was this deacon, and he was always against everything. And they went around, and a widow died, and she left a sum of money to the church. And the preacher proposed that they do a light fixture, what they call a chandelier. Got to the deacon's meeting. Of course, the anti-deacon says, "I'm against it." The preacher says, "Well, why are you against it?" He says, "Well, first of all, we don't have anybody in this church that can play the chandelier. And second, what we really need is some light out there for you." Okay? The easiest thing in the world to do is to be against everything. What are your solutions?
Do I get to respond to that? He asked the question, what are your solutions? That was Stephen. Okay. Just make sure.
But we will be asking you those questions.
Okay.
Mr. Haynes, in talking to several business owners and asking them in town what negatively affects their business the most, the common theme has been the current city codes. They say the codes make it difficult for them to expand or further develop their business. What is your opinion regarding the current state of city codes and the impact on local business? And do you have any plans to improve this? You have 2 minutes.
Absolutely. Now, this is my passion, okay? I hate barriers to entry, and I hate government regulation that overregulates us. And if you want to know the truth, I believe that if you talk to the business community, they are much more frustrated about this than they are the tax rate, okay? I have tried everything I know to get rid of city code. I started in 2012 a Unified Appeals Board, which says if there's something in the code that's wrong, an unreasonable barrier to entry, appeal it to the Unified Appeals Board. They can then bring that to the City Council, and we will take it out. Do you know how many times the Unified Appeals Board has been used in our community? Twice. 6 years, it's been used 2 times, okay? This is the most complicated area, but let me tell you, for example, where the problem is. So the codes are not written by the city officials. They're written by insurance companies, okay? And they're written to make your insurance rates go lower in theory because the risk is lower, okay? What happens is if we don't adopt the most recent and current code, then the International Standards Organization, or ISO, comes into your community and lowers your ISO rating because we didn't adopt the most recent code. They actually did that to us this last year because for 8 years as mayor, I refused, fought, threatened to veto any additional codes in our city. But last year it happened. They came in, lowered our ISO rating because we wouldn't adopt the most recent codes. So what happens is when they lower that ISO rating, guess what happens to your insurance rate? It goes up exponentially by much more than your tax would, okay? So the solution is much larger than what's happening in Brownwood. But the starter is for our contractors, our businesses, and our community to use the process I put in place. And where there are unreasonable barriers to entry, let's get rid of them.
Mr. Tittle, do you want to respond? You have 1 minute.
You bet.
Over the last several months, I've visited with dozens and dozens of businesses. I've walked Main Street, Fisk, and Center, and visited almost every business owner in town, except for the ones that I knew were Stephen's buddies and wouldn't let me in and wouldn't listen to me. But I would still do business with them, okay? This is just a political campaign. Let me tell you a story. It was February 14th, 2 days before the decision whether you should sign up for the election. My wife and I were having lunch. I hate to say this because I wasn't spending my tax dollars in Brownwood, okay, at a Rancho Loma pizza place up in Coleman. I asked the owner, he was there, and I said, we could really use one of these type of restaurants in Brownwood. Why won't you move one? What would you consider moving one of these to Brownwood? You know what he said? Record high property taxes in the city, and the city won't work with you on their codes. We need somebody with business experience. That's what I have. By the way, I have time because I'm retired. I don't have a job or a business downtown. I will sit down with every business, with Guy, with Emily, and we'll work with those businesses so that we can recruit those businesses. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Tittle, this is for you. This will involve some topics that you've already touched on, and no, it does not involve Empower Texans. So, but maybe we can talk some specifics here. And the question is this. During your campaign, you have discussed cutting wasteful spending, lowering property taxes. So can you tell us what is your plan to accomplish this, and can you highlight the major line items and the departments in the budget that you intend to cut? And how will this affect the tax rate, and what is your timeline for lowering taxes? And you have 4 minutes.
Well, that was a long, complicated question. But first of all, let me say this. Even in politics, I bet we could get almost 100% of our folks in this room to say we all want good police, good fire, and good utilities, right? About 100% vote on that. We all want that. So that's off the table. What you have to do with any budget at any business, whether it's a government or a 3M or your home budget, is increase the top line. That means we need to recruit business and increase revenue. It doesn't take an engineer or a lawyer to drive up and down Main Street to see that we have dozens and dozens of buildings that are in lots that are sitting idle. We need to recruit those businesses. That's one way to help the budget. The second thing we need to do is we do need to take out unnecessary spending. We know we had a record high budget increase, property tax increase, and property rate increase last year, so why would we double our city spending on things like travel, $180,000 on travel? And then the last issue is the more difficult issue, and it will take more time. We've reached an all-time record high on our debt over the last 8 years. It'll take a few years to work that off, but what we need to do, when I manage depreciation or debt at 3M, you would have about $1 million target every month, which is a lot bigger than the city. And what we would do is once we would write off or pay off $200,000 or $400,000 of that debt, then we would spend the next project so that we kept our debt flat rather than spending like this. This is what's happened over the last 8 years. That's why our debt is out of control and our interest rate is, our record high interest spending is out of control. Did I hit all the points of that? It's a long question.
It was a long question.
And I'm not supported by Empower Texas, by the way. You brought it up, not me.
Oh, and I'm sorry. You actually do have some more time remaining if you want to take it.
Particular? No, I'm finished with that topic. That's how you balance any budget. You increase the top line, you take out the cost line, and you manage your debt, and you improve your bottom line.
Okay, Mr. Haynes, we'll go to you for a rebuttal. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just 2 fact check items. This was not a record high budget increase. The budget increase this year was 2.3%. And the travel budget is not $180,000. The $180,000 is a training and travel budget. There's costs involved for tuition, other things like that. The travel component of that is probably about 1/3.
Okay. Do I get to answer the rebuttal?
You still have a couple minutes if you need to. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I got time. Yeah, because it's only fair.
Yes.
He's questioning my numbers. Yeah, here's what we did at 3M. Whether it's $80,000, $100,000, or $200,000 on travel and training, what we need to do is get into the modern age. 3M spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on travel. And then when we got into difficult times, we went to a thing called the internet. So every month I did multiple training modules on the internet. And that's the way, whether it's a safety training, qualification training, retraining for a job, and I did multiple modules a month on the internet. That way you don't have to spend thousands of dollars on mileage and food and hotels and airplane tickets. There are ways to use technology to reduce those costs, and that's the kind of leadership and experience I'll bring.
Okay, Mr. Haynes, if you wish to rebut, you have 2 minutes.
Well, frankly, I'm not sure I heard an answer. And the truth of the matter is, you say you're going to cut taxes, you say you're going to cut spending, but you got to give me an example of more than $180,000 in a $34 million budget. And so, let me give you the example of how this is so difficult, right? So the city's tax rate, what you pay every January, the city's tax rate is only 30% of that amount, if you look at the overall rate, okay? So that means if we lower our taxes by 20%, you're not going to get a 20% tax cut. You're going to get a 6% tax cut because 20% of 30% is 6%, right? So in order for us to cut 20%, we'd have to decrease spending by about $1.7 million. So it ain't going to get there by telling people they got to do the training on the internet. It's going to take deep, deep cuts. As far as the comments about improving the top line, that means more taxes. It means more revenue. That's what that means, okay? Now, as far as the comment about travel, let me address that one specifically. 55% of everything we do in training and travel is an unfunded mandate. It's something that the state of Texas tells us we have to do. 55% of it, okay? Furthermore, the people that we're training, i.e. your policemen and your firefighters, if they get it wrong and they're not well trained, people die. And so this is kind of an important thing for us to spend money on. There was a lot said in that answer, but I want to emphasize this, and y'all hear me carefully when I say this. The city's budget has gone up 1.6% on average over the last 8 years. 13%. During that same period of time, the ultra-conservative Texas legislature has gone up 19%. Your federal government has gone up 58%. Folks, it is unfair to these men sitting at that table. It is unfair to our city employees sitting around the room to claim that spending is out of control when we have been the most conservative government that regulates you.
All right, Mr. Haynes.
Do I get to respond to that one?
That was his response to your answer, yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Haynes.
Sorry.
The construction of the new central fire station a few years ago cost around $3 million. Do you feel this was necessary and a benefit to the residents and businesses of Brownwood? You have 2 minutes.
Well, the central fire station was necessary because what has happened is firefighting has evolved since 1960. And it does a lot of things in the fire department that it simply didn't do back then. Now, when we looked at rebuilding the fire station, we looked at the option of actually renovating the fire station. The problem is this. It's on the busiest intersection in town, literally. According to the TxDOT traffic section counts, that's the busiest intersection in town. And for years, we would back a several $100,000 fire truck across 4 lanes of federally funded highway traffic and back it into the fire station. We had multiple accidents. It was incredibly unsafe. And so we looked at that and said, this is not a good option. So where are we going to go? So we chose a location that was already owned on city lot because that saved us about $250,000 in not having to buy the land. And that's why it's located where it's located, okay? Now, is that a reasonable excuse for the money? I don't know, but for me, replacing a fire station every 50 years or so is not an unreasonable expenditure.
Mr. Tittle, you get that chance to respond now. You do have 1 minute.
Thank you. As you know, 3M, the south side of 3M has buildings that are way over 50 years old. The way a business manages their money, they don't go out and spend another $1 million building or multi-million-dollar building. We spend maintenance money every year on those old buildings. As far as the fire station, let's use Stephen's example. I think the people should vote for Ranger annexation. Well, why didn't which was only going to be about $2 million a year. So why didn't the people get a chance to vote on the fire station? That was a very controversial issue. I wasn't involved at that time, but I listened to the debate from a distance in a previous election.
30 seconds.
And so, no, I don't believe it was a good expenditure. By the way, I don't know how many of you, I've been criticized if I've ever been in the fire station and looked at it. I was in there Tuesday of this week. I've been told it's safe, unsafe. You can't breathe the air, it's falling down. There's some business in there doing some part-time contract work inside it right now. That's the reason I got in. I happened to be driving by, the garage door was open, and there were some people, 4 or 5 guys working in there. So if it's all that unsafe, then why did we spend $3.5 million on a new one? And, I guess that's the double one.
That
It would be better to spend $3.5 million investing in factories and businesses in town that pay taxes and create jobs.
Okay, Mr. Tittle, on social media, not Empower Texans, just social media, you've stated that you would like to recruit new business to our empty lots. What is your plan to accomplish this? And you have 2 minutes.
As I mentioned earlier, there are two things that dozens and dozens of businesses have told me that we need to do. We need to work on our property taxes. That won't happen overnight, but we need to work on it. We also need to work on our codes. One of the things we can do, the City Council meets every other Tuesday. That leaves 2 other Tuesdays in the month. What I would set up, 2 things. One is a plan to meet with our city leaders on business recruitment. What are the key locations or buildings that we have open, and who are the potential folks we can recruit for that business? And on the next Tuesday of the month, this is how we worked at 3M, we would have a budget meeting, and we would look at line item by line item, because you know how you save millions of dollars? When I was at 3M, I had an operator come in one day, and he wanted a new pump. It's going to cost $1,000. And I said, well, okay, we're going through a tough quarter. Can you wait till next year, next quarter? And he said, I can, Mike, but it's only $1,000, and you know, 3M can afford $1,000. And I said, yes, you're right. 3M, multi-billion-dollar company, can afford $1,000. But we have 600 employees here. If every one of them comes in this month and asks for $1,000, that's $600,000. If we do that every month of the year, all of a sudden that's $7.2 million. So how do you balance the budget? $1,000 at a time, line item by line item. It takes that kind of discipline to manage a budget. That's the experience and leadership that I would bring to the office.
And Mr. Haynes, if you wish to rebut, you have 1 minute.
I'm not sure how we got from that question to spending and balancing the budget, but that's what we talked about. But balancing the budget, y'all all know that balancing the budget is required by state law. It's not an issue. It always has been budget balanced, and it always will be balanced. But let me go back to the empty building. So my opponent took a picture of the Toyota building with my sign in front of it and talked about we had too many empty buildings. You know what you didn't see in that picture? A for sale sign. You know why you didn't see it? Because it's not for sale. My client happens to own it. I happen to know what his plans are for the building. And that story goes on all the way across our community. I know every story behind every vacant building on our main corridors. I know exactly what the issue is because I've worked with all the owners and I've tried to put businesses in there. I've lost count of the number of developers that I have sent to the old movie theater building that just simply doesn't develop. So all we can do is make efforts to try to get those buildings to develop, but ultimately it's up to the owners who have to participate with our community to do it.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience with these questions, for your open and honest answers. We're coming to our last 2 questions, which are similar to what we had asked the councilman. So this will be identical questions, so there's no rebuttal to these. Mr. Haynes, what is your philosophy for supporting the Brownwood Police Department to fight crime? You have 2 minutes.
Trust the professionals and get out of their way is the bottom line. Look, police department's a profession, and those guys are well trained, and they spent their lives going to academy and taking places. They know how to do what they do, and it would be shameful of me as a lawyer that doesn't practice criminal law to think that I have the right and the ability to go in and tell them how to do their job. But what I can do is I can listen. I can listen to my fire chief, I can listen to my police chief, I can listen to the assistant chiefs and say, what is keeping you from doing your job? What is holding you back? What do you need? I.e. new fire station, i.e. new police cruisers. What do we need to do a better job? And that's all you can do. The mayor doesn't have the right, by the way, on any issue. The city charter provides that the mayor may not give any direction to a city employee. The mayor may not hire or fire a single individual. We simply don't have that capacity because there's a city manager in place. And so what do? You listen and you trust your fire chief and your police chief to do the jobs well.
And Mr. Tittle, the exact same question, and after this question we will have closing comments from both candidates. So let me repeat that question, Mr. Tittle. What is your philosophy for supporting the Brownwood Police Department to help fight crime? You have 2 minutes.
I'm looking at Chief Nichols over there. We talked several times this week, and in recent weeks I'm 100% in support of our police officers. I've already said this. If you listen carefully, that we could probably get 100% vote on supporting police department, fire, utilities. Those are the basic needs. But do we need to spend millions of dollars on things that we didn't need, like fire stations? So I'm in total support of our police force and our fire department.
Okay, well,
And by the way, I like it when I see them in my neighborhood because it makes me feel safe.
okay, we'll go ahead and do closing statements. Mr. Haynes, you have 2 minutes if you'd like to give a closing statement.
You know, 8 years ago, I laughed with Dennis Graham when he came in. I thought he was relaxed because he didn't have to do this today. But 8 years ago, I stood here and I had some ideas. And the idea was that we were going to recruit retail, we were going to pave your streets and improve your deteriorating civic facilities. And folks, I did what I said I was going to do. With the help of these men and with the help of the city staff, I fulfilled the promises that I said I was going to do. I recruited retail. We've increased retail sales by 20%. We've paved over 80 streets and 30 miles of road. And we've done all that by only increasing the city's budget by 1.6% annually. We changed our parks fundamentally in the way they look and the way they operate. At its core, though, why do I want to do this job? And that's when Mike did come into office, his specific question was, why in the world would anyone want to do this job? And sometimes you wonder why anyone would want to do this job. But I do it because I've got 4 little kids that I want to have the same opportunities that I have. I want them to be able to look at Brownwood and say, you know what, this is where I want to live. I want them to choose to come back to Brownwood because it's a great place to live. Why do I do what I do? I wake up every morning at the breakfast table and know why I do what I do. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Tittle.
Thanks, Stephen. Good debate. And as you can tell, we have had good conversations in his office. I don't think we've ever had conversations near like this one today. Like the debate, they were more a reasonable discussion. But my wife and I lived in Brownwood for 22 years. I worked at 3M for 20 years. We were married 33 years ago in L.A., Lower Alabama, a small southern town, just like this town. That's why we decided to retire here. We've had opportunities to leave multiple times for making salaries that I'm too embarrassed to tell you how high they would be once you become a plant manager at 3M. They're ridiculous. But I'm concerned about the future too. I have children and grandchildren here. That's why we turned down good jobs to stay here. I want a future for Brownwood. And I think your choice is clear. If you want 4 more years of record high property taxes, record high property rates, record high city spending, he keeps saying 1.6%, but it's $5 million a year now, more than it was 8 years ago when he took office. And then you should vote for the incumbent. If you want someone that has time, business experience, and leadership who can work on the budget to manage the budget, lower unnecessary spending, help recruit businesses and knows the inside of those businesses, and will make sure that Ranger annexation never happens again by working with Austin legislators, then that's why I'm asking for your vote.
You're looking at me like, what's next?